The civil rights movement of the 1960s will be remembered for making constitutional freedoms available to many more Americans. But it did something else as well. The movement provided a blueprint for a number of different groups looking for social change. Anti-tax activists, feminists, and of course, the anti-war protesters of the late 60s and 70s.
What are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give a damn. Next stop is Vietnam.
More and more people found our involvement in the Vietnam War difficult to support, as our victory in Southeast Asia seemed less and less likely. The protests themselves would raise that very American question about the limits of free speech, and the war itself raised the constitutional question about the limits of presidential power.
Tonight I want to speak to you of peace in Vietnam and Southeast Asia.
President Lyndon Johnson used his power to escalate the number of troops in Vietnam. But no amount of presidential power could match those gruesome images that TV brought home to Americans each evening. In the end, President Johnson lost the trust of the American people. And the question of trust brings us to Watergate. Watergate. It's the name attached to a seemingly unimportant break-in at a Washington, D.C. office and apartment complex. A break-in that ultimately linked criminal activity and a cover-up to the Nixon White House.
That I had no knowledge whatever of the Watergate break-in before it occurred.
And although the president would resist repeated requests to turn over information, the Supreme Court would ultimately force him to bend to the rule of law. Nixon resigned his presidency rather than face certain impeachment.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute
the office of President of the United States.
By the 1980s, a more conservative political voice began to be heard, raising questions about the size of the federal government and how we should interpret the Constitution. The result was a tug of war over issues like abortion rights, contraception, gay rights, and prayer in the public schools. And throughout it all, our ever-diverse population has found our system of constitutional government to be rock solid. At a time when the foundations of many Eastern European countries were collapsing, unable to withstand the tide of freedom.